Alright, this is a quick video on how I swapped the exhaust on my Subaru to a newer, I think the 2012 WRX exhaust. I went to get inspected, and you can't pass inspection and mess with an exhaust leak. I looked under there and I found what I thought was the hole, and then ended up finding a much bigger hole in the muffler when I pulled the exhaust. Splitting this old exhaust wasn't really possible because of all the rust, so I decided to just try and swap out the whole catback. Went online, searched around for some exhaust, and found a lot of pretty cheap, like basically brand new WRX STI exhausts from people who had bought their new car and then immediately swapped out the exhaust. And they all look pretty similar. Turns out Subaru uses a pretty consistent exhaust layout year to year, which makes it really pretty convenient. So one of the ways I knew the new exhaust was going to fit is because when I was looking at the old exhaust, I realized this gasket in here in the middle of these two flanges was shot. And when I looked up the part on Subaru's website, I realized that they use that donut gasket part on pretty much every car they make. They're still using that same one from like the late 90s all the way through to now. So I knew that the diameter was correct. I knew the flange looked about right. The bend over here in the back looked about right. And when I went to pick up the exhaust from the guy, I laid them out next to each other, and they pretty much lined up. The exhaust hangers on the mufflers, so these hangers in here, like this guy, and there's one in here. Those were in the right location, but they were too high because this exhaust sits lower on the STI or WRX or whatever. So those all had to be bent. Some of them pretty far. I didn't have to cut those or weld those or anything. Just heat them up with a torch and then bend them so that the exhaust would fit snugly in there. The only other modification that needed to be made to get this exhaust to fit was extending it about 2 or 3 inches. Just bought this sleeve here on AutoZone. Just kind of slipped over, perfect diameter. I forget what it is, you'll have to measure it. And welded it up. Pretty straightforward welding job. There's still a few pinholes that I have to go back and fix. But yeah, that was the only other modification that needed to take place. The big differences between this and the stock exhaust, one of them is the resonator on this is much smaller, and it's a different shape. So the exhaust overall sits lower because the bends in the back are a little bit different, and one of the areas that's the worst is in the middle here. So I imagine this guy's going to get dinged up if I sit around anything. But yeah, if your Subaru is anything like mine, when you get under here, you'll probably find that the flange on this side of the exhaust is pretty rusty. In my case, one of the ears was completely rusted off, and the other one was just like barely hanging on. So I angle grinded that all off and grabbed this just generic exhaust flange from AutoZone. Got some slightly longer bolts that came with that flange, and I was able to use the existing flange that came on the new side of the exhaust, as well as that old sort of fix-a-flange thing, and some springs from the spring bolts, new spring bolts, that is, the old ones were toast, to cobble this up. And it doesn't leak here, which is good. I was worried about that not sealing, but it works really well. So overall, this repair slash modification went really smoothly, a lot smoother than a lot of the other repairs I've done in this car. I paid about $200 for the exhaust. I could have found one for less, definitely. I mean, some people were just giving these things away because they just take them off like brand new and then swap them out. But $200 to get it the same day, basically, and then took about half a day of adjusting those hangers and then cutting and re-welding and fitting the exhaust in. Overall, went really smoothly. Definitely would recommend if you have an old rusty Subaru like this. The other major difference is the sound, obviously. I'll try to include a clip, but it really sounds to me like indistinguishable from WRX or STI, which is yeah, whatever. I mean, this car is slow, so it's just kind of weird that it sounds like that. But there's a very low rumble from like 1,000 to 1,500 RPM, and that's about it. Otherwise, it's a little bit louder. But um, yeah,